In Homestead, Florida, stands one of this generation's megalithic structures, built by a single man named Ed Leedskalnin. First in Florida City, he relocated the entire castle to Homestead, Florida, where he completed the work. Frequently compared to the pyramids at Giza, the heads of Easter Island, and Stonehenge, we look at Coral Castle. One giant question remains. How did he build this? The only first-hand accounts that we have of other people watching Ed work is only at night, where he has been said to sing to the stones that now make up what he called Rock Gate. Many of these single pieces of rock weigh over 1,000 tons, and the question remains, how did he do this? We explore this question among many other questions about the nature of our reality, hidden technology, mathematics, and the world energy grid. Come along with me on this journey as we look into just how Ed Leedskalnin created Coral Castle. Hello everyone, welcome to the Yissel Missile Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel, and today we continue our Coral Castle Deep Dive series. We are on part 32. Good to have y'all here. So we'll be continuing reading from this book. We're already this far into it. And today is chapter 4. So I'm just briefly looking over the chapter here before we begin. So next week, we will be covering the Philadelphia experiment. That's the next chapter in this book. But today is Mathematics of the World Grid by Bruce Cathie. He was the author of the last book that I put the series together with. And we have a lot of small print today. So I'm not sure how long exactly we'll run here. We'll see how I feel. So I'm not going to do another 4-hour show. Sorry about that. It's just not palatable. And Brenda from Beyond the Box is in the chat. Hello, Brenda. All right. So we'll hear a little bit about Bruce Cathie today. That's all this chapter is covering, is Bruce Cathie. There's not too many diagrams. I'll explain what's on these diagrams if you're just listening along. So, let's get to it. Alright, so this starts off with definitions of terms. Harmony and harmonic, etc., as defined by the Britannica World Standard Dictionary. I just realized we didn't have the slideshow going. Alright. We're going to stay in this format here for today because I will be showing some diagrams here. So definition number 1, harmony. The state of order, agreement, or completeness in the relations of things or of parts of a whole to each other. Number 2, harmonic. Producing, characterized by, or pertaining to harmony. And there's 3 examples here, listed A, B, and C. A. Music. Pertaining to a tone whose rate of vibration is an exact multiple of a given primary tone. B. Mathematical. Derived from or originally suggested by the numerical relations between the vibrations of the musical harmonies or overtones of the same fundamental tone. Harmonic functions. And finally, C. Physics. Any component of a periodic quantity which is an integral multiple of the fundamental frequency. So now I think this goes into Bruce Cathie's own words here. In this book, I discuss the fundamental harmonies of the vibrational frequencies which form the building blocks of our immediate universe. And those of the theoretical anti-universe which modern scientists have postulated as existing in mirror-like image of our own. I theorize that the whole of physical reality which is tangible to us is formed from the basic geometric harmonies, or harmonics, of the angular velocities, or waveforms of light. From these basic harmonies, or resonating waveforms, myriad other waves are created which blend in sympathetic resonance, one with the other, thus forming the physical structures. Einstein stated that the geometric structure of space-time determines the physical processes. Or processes, however you want to pronounce that. I theorize that space and time manifest from the geometric harmonies of the wave motions of light. the fundamental harmonic of light in free space, in geometric terms being an angular velocity of 144,000 minutes of arc per grid second, there being 97,200 grid seconds to one revolution of the Earth. When physical matter is manifested in the universe, the waveforms of light from which it is formed are slowed down fractionally in order to release the energy required for the formation process. This is demonstrated by the unified harmonic equations in Chapter 1. And again, I believe this is an excerpt from a larger publication that Bruce Cathie put together. Unless we did. Yeah, I think these are all individually written, and David Hatcher Childress puts these together as a compilation. Hey, Missing Time. Good to see you here in the chat. Yeah, we're going through the opening of the Bruce L. Cathie paper for today's chapter. Now let's continue here. It was found that to calculate the values of harmonic waveforms that have sympathetic resonance, it was possible to disregard zeros to the right or left of whole numbers and extract the values direct from the mathematical tables. My interest in the increasing UFO activity in the New Zealand area led me to the discovery that the surface of the world was crisscrossed with an intricate network of energy grid lines. Oh. Missing Time 420 says this is Jason, new name. Well, Jason, welcome back. I didn't know that was you these past several weeks. Good to have you here. I guess the hand signal should have tipped me off, right? Because that's usually how you sign on here. All right, let's continue here. Also, by the way, the weather's been going up and down here, so it's gonna start like affecting my voice. It's been affecting my voice already tonight, but no worries on that. It's jumping from the 70s to the 30s to the 60s. It's just bouncing up and down. I began my research in 1965. The information in this chapter regarding the structure and mathematical values built into the system will consist of material condensed from my first 3 books, plus the findings derived from my recent research up to early 1982. So yeah, I think this is an excerpt from one of Cathie's books. In a general way, I was convinced that UFOs were actively engaged in a survey of the Earth for some definite reason. I felt that their visits were not haphazard. They were not just on casual sightseeing tours. Quite a number of investigators around the world had come to the conclusion that these sightings were beginning to form a pattern. At this period, however, this pattern was so complex as to defy any definition or solution. By the correlation of sightings, small sections of track had been identified, and some saucers had been seen moving along these set paths. Some of these had hovered over certain spots at set intervals. But these bits and pieces of track lines were so scattered around the surface of our planet that it was quite impossible to fit them together into any semblance or order. I was certain that If an overall pattern could be found and plotted, it might be possible to establish the reason behind UFO activity. I considered that the pattern would be geometric if these things were intelligently controlled, and that if somehow I could find the key to one section, then I might solve the rest by duplication and inference. I had sighted a number of unidentified objects in the sky over a period of several years, and by correlating two of these with the other data, I was eventually able to construct a grid system which covered the whole world. One of the sightings was in 1956. I was a DC-3 co-pilot crewing a flight from Auckland to Paraparaumu. It was about 6 p.m., conditions were calm, and there was unlimited visibility. We were just south of Waverly at 7,000 feet when I saw this object at an extremely high altitude in the east. I drew the captain's attention to it, and together we watched it travel in a curved trajectory from east to west across our track until it disappeared in a flash of light at about 10,000 feet in the area of D'Urville Island, and that's spelled D''Urville. It appeared to travel across New Zealand in the vicinity, or slightly to the north, of Cook Strait. And it was so large that two streaks similar to vapor trails were seen to extend from either side of its pale green disk. Yeah, Jason, I'll jump ahead here real quick. He's asking I wonder how his grid looks. I think it's very similar to many other ley line grids that have been put together. These things are mathematically put together, and you have more lines on one map than another. It just varies on what they're looking for. Alright, let me reread that last sentence here. When about halfway across the strait, a small object detached itself from the parent body and dropped vertically until it disappeared. It looked almost as if the main disk was at such a high temperature that a globule had dripped from it. I thought about this later and decided that if that were so, the small object would also have a curved trajectory in the direction of the parent body. But this was not so. It detached and dropped vertically down at great speed. There could be only one answer for this action. The small body must have been controlled. Calculations at a later date proved this UFO to have been between 1,500 and 2,000 feet in diameter. A report in a Nelson newspaper on the following day described an explosion at a high altitude to the north of the city. The shockwave broke windows in some local glass houses. The other sighting occurred on the 12th of March, 1965. This was the best and most interesting of them all, and from then my investigations were pressed on with all speed until they culminated in my present findings. I had always expected to see UFOs in the sky, and that was where my attention was usually focused. When I was flying, I was alert and ready to analyze any object sighted from the aircraft. I never expected to find a saucer landing at my feet, and so far, this has never happened. This sighting, however, was different from all the others because I observed it lying under 30 feet of water. I was scheduled to carry out a positioning flight from Wanuapai, Auckland's main airport at the time, to Kaitaia. That's spelled Kaitaia. Departure was at 11 a.m. and no passengers were involved, and the weather was perfect. I decided to fly visually to Kaitaia along the west coast. An officer from the operations department was on board, and this was a good opportunity to show him some of the rugged country to the north. And in parentheses, I must stress that air traffic regulations were strictly observed during the flight. In parentheses. On leaving Wanuapai, I climbed to clear the area, and when approaching the southern end of the Kaipara Harbor, just north of Helensville, I dropped to a lower altitude to have a better look at anything in the flight path. The tide in the harbor was well out, and the water over the mudflats and estuaries was quite shallow. I suppose we were about a third of the way across the harbor when I spotted what I took to be a stranded gray-white whale. I veered slightly to port to fly more directly over the object and to obtain a better look. I suppose a pilot develops the habit of keeping his emotions to himself. As far as I can remember, I gave no indication of surprise, and I said nothing as I looked down. My, quote, whale, end quote, was definitely a metal fish. I could see it very clearly, and I quote from the notes I made later. So it's like bullet points listed A through G. A. The object was perfectly streamlined and symmetrical in shape. B. It had no external control surfaces or protrusions. C. It appeared metallic, and there was a suggestion of a hatch on top, streamlined in shape. It was not quite halfway along the body as measured from the nose. D. It was resting on the bottom of the estuary and headed toward the south, as suggested from the streamlined shape. E. The shape was not that of a normal submarine, and there was no superstructure. F. I estimated the length as 100 feet, with a diameter of 15 feet at the widest part. And G. The object rested no more than 30 feet, or rested in no more than 30 feet of clear water. The bottom of the harbor was visible and the craft was sharply defined. So 100 feet long and 15 feet wide. Whatever it is that he saw there. Inquiries made from the Navy confirmed that it would not have been possible for a normal submarine to be in this particular position due to the configuration of the harbor and coastline. An American scientist checked this spot on the harbor with a depth sounder in September 1969. He informed me afterwards that a hole had been detected in the harbor bed approximately 1/8 of a mile wide and over 100 feet deep, which I consider would indicate some activity had been carried out in this position some 5 years previously. I published the scientist's report in my second book. I had a further key to the puzzle in April 1965. My wife saw an advertisement in the local paper seeking members for a UFO organization called New Zealand Scientific and Space Research. I contacted this organization and found that a vast amount of information had been very efficiently compiled. Material had been collected from 25 different countries over a period of 12 years. I was invited to study the information at leisure. Among this mass of data, I discovered the reports of a UFO that had been seen from several different localities in both islands of New Zealand on March 26, 1965. People in Napier, New Plymouth, Palmerston North, Wanganui, Fielding, and Otaki Forks in the North Island. Nelson Coast Road, Beanheim, and Westport or Cape Foulwind in the South Island had all reported sightings. It was decided that I try to plot the track of this UFO. From the considerable amount of information available, I found that the maximum variation in the times of sightings from all areas was 15 minutes. Most reports gave the time as 9:45 p.m. This proved that the object must have been very large and at a high altitude during the greater part of its trajectory. There was nothing of any great significance or originality in these accounts, and they followed the pattern of many other sightings. However, from the mass of detail supplied by so many different people over so wide an area, it was possible to plot the track of the object with reasonable accuracy. I started work on a Mercator's plotting chart, and after several hours of checking one report against the other and calculating possible elevations and trajectories, I felt I had refined the plot sufficiently to draw in the final track of the object or objects. The result is shown on map 1. So I'm going to read the caption to this map and then we'll show it here. So the caption reads, "Showing section of first track line discovered of world grid system. This map was originally published in my first book, Harmonic 33, in 1968. The track line extends from the position of a USO sighted in the Kaipara Harbor, Auckland, to a position at D'Urville Island where 2 large UFOs were seen to disappear in a flash of light." So I will take it that he's saying that it's traveling from north to south. So it started as a USO up here. And these are all the locations where this object or objects were sighted from. And that two UFOs disappeared at D'Urville Island, right? That's what they just said. So this is the map that Bruce Cathie put together. The track began about 70 nautical miles north of New Plymouth, passed just over to the west of Mount Egmont, and finished at D'Urville Island. When first seen, the altitude would have been about 30,000 feet, curving down on a flight path to somewhere around 10,000 feet when it disappeared. Sometime after those sightings on the 26th of March 1965, I had another look at the plot I have made. I could find no flaws in my thinking, but I needed more information. As I was to discover many times later, the clues were quite obvious, but I was not then sufficiently expert in realizing their significance. In point of fact, this first tracking was to be the starting point of a whole string of discoveries of which I have yet to find an end. I pored over that plot for a long time before it suddenly occurred to me that the track appeared to be in line with the position where I had sighted the unidentified submarine object, or USO, on March 12th, 1965. So that would be about 2 weeks prior. On extending the line back, I found it was in line with the sightings of the 26th of March. I was positive there had to be a connection, but to prove it was a different matter. I checked my report files again and found that on the 2nd of March, some fishermen just north of the coast of New Plymouth had seen a large object plunge into the sea and disappear. They thought it was an aircraft and reported the incident to the appropriate authorities, but no aircraft or personnel were missing. I checked this position on the map and found that it also fitted the established track line. Was this connected with the USO of March 12th? And could the two sightings be of the same object, sighted twice in 10 days? Could it be working slowly up this track, carrying out some project on the seabed? I tucked this thought away for future reference and carried on with the search. It was some days later that I remembered the UFO I had seen in 1956. This object was similar, and most significant of all, both objects had apparently traveled at 90 degrees to each other, and finished in the same grand all-illuminating flash in the area of D'Urville Island. If these objects were not controlled, how could anyone explain such coincidences? No two meteors or other natural phenomena could coincidentally carry out similar maneuvers, travel at 90 degrees to each other, and both decide to end their existence at the same point in space within 9 years of each other. Also, in both cases, objects had been seen to emerge from the parent bodies. Was this irrefutable evidence that they were intelligently controlled vehicles? I plotted the track of the 1956 UFO on the map at 90 degrees to the north-south line. I realized that I had no definite proof that they were at exactly 90 degrees to each other, or that the 1956 track was not a few miles north or south of this position. Still, I had to start from somewhere, and I would assume this to be correct until other evidence proved me wrong. Two track lines at 90 degrees meant little on their own. If I found several at 90 degrees, I might have something. A grid, perhaps? These two lines hinted at this, and I believed that if I could solve the system of measurement, then I had two ready-made baselines to work from. Once again, I went to the UFO files and found that a Frenchman by the name of Aimé Miquel had been studying UFOs for a number of years and had found small sections of track lines in various areas of Europe. And so this man's name is spelled A-I-M-E for his first name, and his last name M-I-C-H-E-L. Saucers had been seen hovering at various points along these track lines, and Mr. Miquel had observed that the average distance between these points was 54.43 kilometers. By itself, this was only a small grain of information, but like a starting gun, it set me off again. Using the Kaipara Harbor as a starting point, I marked off the 54.43 kilometer intervals along the track line I had found. I was disappointed when I was unsuccessful in obtaining an even distribution of positions to the D'Urville Island disappearing point. I checked and rechecked, but nothing worked out. I slept on the problem, and at some time during the night, inspiration turned up the wick. Once more, the light grew bright. I remembered that a great number of sightings had occurred around the Blenheim area. Even before the advent of ordinary aircraft in New Zealand, this area had been visited by UFOs. I had read about them in old copies of the local papers, and many recent sightings suggested again that this area had something special about it. So I dragged out my map and extended the track line until it cut a 90-degree coordinate from the town of Blenheim. The distance from this point to the Kaipara position I found to be exactly 300 nautical miles. And 1 nautical mile is equal to 1 minute of arc on the Earth's surface. Could it be that the rough interval of 54.43 kilometers discovered by Miquel was, in fact, an interval of 30 nautical miles when corrected? If so, then this interval could be evenly spaced along my track line 10 times. Was this the system of measurement used by the UFOs? There was no proof, of course, but it seemed a reasonable assumption. A minute of arc is a measurement which could be applied to the whole universe. University personnel and others in the academic field attacked me repeatedly over this issue. They maintained that degrees and minutes of arc were arbitrary values set up by the ancient mathematicians, and that therefore my calculations were meaningless. I finally found proof of my argument in the works of Pythagoras. As my research progressed, I discovered that the harmonic of the speed of light in free space had a value of 144. If this was divided by 2, to find the harmonic of 1/2 cycle or half wave, the answer was 72. If this value was then applied to the Pythagoras right-angled 3, 4, 5 triangle and each side was extended in this ratio, then the figure had sides of 216, 288, and 360 units. The harmonic proportions thus derived were equal to 216 equals 21,600 equals the number of minutes of arc in a circle. 360 equals 360 equals the number of degrees in a circle, and 288 equals 144 times 2 equals 2c, where c equals the speed of light harmonic. It appeared from this that the harmonic of light had a very definite relationship with the geometry of a circle, and that the early mathematicians were fully aware of this fact. This will become clearer as you read through this book. The fifth interval of 30 nautical miles from the Kaipara position coincided with the position off the coast of New Plymouth, where the mysterious object had plunged into the sea. The plotted points of disappearance of the 2 large UFOs at D'Urville Island did not quite match up with the 9th interval, but this did not worry me unduly, as I expected that a small percentage of error must be expected in my original plot. I readjusted this position to the 9th interval and carried on the search to see how many other sightings I could fit into this pattern. The results exceeded my expectations. I found that by using units of 30 minutes of arc latitude north-south and 30 minutes of arc longitude east-west on my Mercator's map, a grid pattern was formed into which a great number of UFO reports could be fitted. I eventually had a map with 16 stationary and 17 moving UFOs plotted on grid intersections and track lines. Man, he really did his homework with this. Having satisfied myself that my reasoning and plotting were not false, I considered that I had good proof that New Zealand, possibly other countries, and probably the whole world, were being systematically covered by some type of grid system. In my first book, I demonstrated that the main grid pattern consisted of grid lines spaced at intervals of 30 minutes of arc, latitude and longitude. In my second book, I probably confused the issue a bit, as I stated that the east-west grid lines were spaced at 24 minutes of arc. This was due to the spacing being measured in nautical miles, or values in minutes of latitude. The actual length of a minute of longitude varies mathematically from 1 nautical mile at the equator to 0 at the north and south poles. The value of 30 minutes of arc in terms of longitude in the New Zealand area happened to be an average of 24 nautical miles, which can be confusing those readers who are not familiar with map scales. Reference to the grid structure will therefore be stated from now on in minute of arc values only for latitude and longitude to minimize confusion. I subsequently discovered that the grid lattice could be further divided. It is now evident that the grid lines in the main system are spaced at intervals of 7.5 minutes of arc, north-south, and east-west. The importance of this will prove itself when compared with the rest of the calculations in this book. There are 21,600 minutes of arc in a circle, and when this is divided by 7.5, we get a value of 2,880. The grid lattice therefore is tuned harmonically to twice the speed of light, 288, as will be shown in other sections. Missing Time 420 says this seems related to Patrick Jackson and his Sphere Orb Network book. I have not heard of that, but I will take a note of it. Yeah, it sure sounds like Bruce Cathie was just trying to plot the UFOs that he was seeing as a pilot. And this led him to all this work with the world grid lines. Okay, continuing on. Let me just get another drink of water here. It appeared that I had found a section of geometric grid pattern in the New Zealand area. I now had to form some theory of construction for the whole world. I could then possibly fit the New Zealand section into it. By drawing a series of patterns on a small plastic ball, I finally found a system which could be used as a starting point for a global investigation. And in parentheses he says, the basic pattern is shown in diagram 1. And that's what I showed earlier, so we'll see it again. I was sure I was on the right track, but now I had to superimpose this pattern on the world globe. It was essential that I find a point position somewhere on the Earth upon which to orientate the geometrical pattern. I finally came up with an item of news that gave me a very important clue on how to proceed. On the 29th of August, 1964, an American survey ship, Eltanin, was carrying out a sweep of the seabed off the coast of South America. A series of submarine photographs were being taken of the area by means of a camera attached to a long cable. A surprise was in store when these photographs were developed. On one of the points, in marvelous detail, was an aerial-type object sticking up from an otherwise featureless seabed. This object appeared to be metallic and perfectly symmetrical in construction. The array consisted of 6 main crossbars with small knob-like ends and a small crossbar at the top. And I believe we've viewed this before in Bruce Cathie's other book, but we'll be looking at this photograph again. Each cross looked to be set at angles of 15 degrees to the others, and the whole system stood about 2 feet in height. The position where this object was found was given as latitude 59 degrees Yeah, you see, I don't know. I don't know how to read these directions anymore. I figured it out a few months ago, but I can't remember what I was saying to this. Because it says 08 and then the symbol for feet. But I know that's not it. So 59 degrees, 08 south, longitude 105 degrees west. As this bit of ironmongery was situated at a depth of 13,500 feet below the surface, I was certain that no human engineers had placed it there. Scientists may be able to descend to those depths in specially constructed bathyspheres, but I don't think they could work as deeply as that on a precision engineering problem. In view of my earlier sightings in the Kaipara harbor, I was willing to accept that the aerial type object had been placed there by an unidentified submarine object, or USO. Since this photo was taken there has been a determined attempt by the scientific world to label this object as nothing more than a plant of some sort. A journalist friend and I managed to visit the Eltanin during one of its few visits to New Zealand, and when we discussed this object with some of the scientists on board, the comment was that it was classed as an artifact. This was before the great hush-up. But regardless of that, I believe that the mathematical proofs will show without doubt that the object is artificial and most probably an aerial of some sort. And the description of this photograph says an oopart, and we covered this word before. OOPART. Photographed on the seabed at a depth of 2,500 fathoms, 1,000 miles west of Cape Horn, by U.S. survey ship Eltanin, whose officers are close-lipped about it. Quote, "It's a marine organism," end quote, maintained an Eltanin officer in Auckland in 1968. Pressed further, he admitted, quote, "But it still looks like an artifact to me," end quote. And we're talking about this thing here. So it's just sticking out of the seabed? Alright, then we have diagram 1, Showing relationship of grid structure to the geographic poles. Each of the two grids has a similar pattern, the interaction of which sets up a third resultant grid. The poles of the three grids are positioned at three different latitudes and longitudes. C, D, E, and F equal the corner aerial positions of grid polar square, similar to aerial discovered by the survey ship Eltanin. J through K, or J2K, equals the polar axis. A is the geographic pole, B is the grid pole, and we have more formulas written down in there. And then map 2 has original grid map produced in 1965. The map shows a grid section of it shows a section of the grid over the New Zealand area. The small circles are positions of UFO activity. The grid lines are spaced at 30 minutes of arc. Note the frequency of sightings occurring at grid intersections. So all the circles on here are the sightings. Missing Time says, I think related to the Patrick Jackson book he mentioned, but I think he's only got info for the USA on it. And then he also says, I think his data is based on internet activity or something. Yeah, I'm not sure what you were trying to say there. Alright, so we have two more diagrams here. Diagram 2 is showing the relationship of a grid polar square to the geographic pole. Each grid has a similar pattern. The pole of each grid is set at a different latitude and longitude. With more map and more math. And then diagram 3 showing the relationship of polar grid squares A, B, and C. The polar squares are orientated in reciprocal positions around both the north and south geographic poles. So these are just more variations here. Okay. The form of this area-like structure also fitted in with the general pattern of the grid as I have envisaged it on the plastic ball. The 6 main crossbars denoted the radiating points of 6 or 12 great circles which form the main structure of the grid. I centered the grid on the position of the object found by the Altanin and the 180-degree reciprocal of this in Russian Siberia, lining the whole thing up with the section I had found in New Zealand. I found the system to be lined up very closely with the magnetic field of the Earth. The equator of the grid followed very closely the line of zero dip around the world. The line of zero dip around the world. In parentheses, he says that is the positions on the Earth's surface where a magnetic compass needle has only a horizontal and no vertical component. End parentheses. In my first 2 books, I discussed the methods I used to line up the system and calculate the first estimates of the grid pole positions and the major focal points of the grid, similar to the Altanin aerial placement. The reciprocal position of the Altanin aerial is at latitude 59 degrees 08 north and longitude 75 degrees east in Siberia. I calculated the length of the diagonal of what I call, for simplicity, the quote, polar grid square, end quote, and found it to be 5,091.168825 minutes of arc long. I plotted a track from the Siberian position through the North Geographic Pole and measured off this distance to locate another corner aerial of the polar square. In parentheses, square is not technically the right word to use, as the 4 sides are formed by sections of small circles which are in different planes to each other. When the polar square areas are transferred from the surface of the Earth's sphere onto a flat plane such as a map, then a perfect square is formed with sides 3,600 minutes long and diagonals of 5,091.168825 minutes of arc. End parentheses. In my first 2 books, I stated, in error, that the sides of the polar squares were formed by sections of great circles 3,600 minutes of arc long, instead of small circles. The great circle distance between these points is in fact 3,418.606915 minutes of arc, which is very confusing to any investigator attempting to reconstruct the grid. I apologize to my readers for this error, which was caused by my lack of access to calculators during my earlier research. In the grid pattern, there are actually 2 small circle segments and 1 great circle segment connecting each of these points which form the polar squares. Each of these segments has a different path over the Earth, and some tricky calculating is necessary to ascertain the true length. Although I used the wrong term in my earlier publications, the actual calculations derived from the grid system are not altered in any way and still stand the test of time. Over the last few years, I have slightly refined the values I demonstrated previously, derived from a mixture of practical and theoretical studies. I have now set up what I see as a completely theoretical system discovered by working entirely by calculator. Time will prove how close my calculations are. I have no doubt that I and others will continue further to perfect the system as more facts come to light. Once I had established this first baseline, I found it quite easy to construct the main skeleton of the grid over the whole surface of the Earth. As my grid work progressed, I found that there were in fact two similar grids, interlocked with each other. The poles of the grids were spaced at different distances from the north geometric pole, and this arrangement set up a series of geometric harmonics which were directly related to the speed of light, mass, and gravity. The interaction of the two grids created a harmonic resonance which in turn formed a third resultant grid. After 10 years of work in correlating information, I have now calculated theoretical positions for the three grid poles in the northern hemisphere, which are very close to my original estimate. Reciprocal positions will give similar values for the southern hemisphere. And you know what? I'm just going to show it on screen here instead of reading it out. Okay. The harmonic value of 3928371 is of extreme importance as it has a direct relationship with the Earth's magnetic field. The harmonic 648 was also shown in my earlier books to have many interesting associations, in particular the harmonic table for temperature. The many other harmonic factors centered around the polar square, corner, aerial positions form a series of complex mathematical associations, and this can be left for those who wish to carry out their own research. If I can show how to construct the main bones of the grid, my part of the job will be complete. I have found it impossible so far to plot the fine grid structure of lines 7.5 minutes apart over the whole world because of the complexity of such an exercise. In parentheses, a full computer program would be necessary, and I do not have the finance required for such an undertaking. End parentheses. Well, I wonder if that could be accomplished now. It should be a piece of cake, right? So far, I have confined myself to the New Zealand area with the small section of finely spaced grid lines that I originally discovered. Over the years, I have been able to plot into this map a great many interesting facts which indicate activity by various scientific groups. This has helped me to gradually build up my own knowledge of the system. My nosiness has not gone unnoticed, as evidenced by the constant probing of interested parties endeavoring to find out the extent of my discoveries. I hope that in the near future, the international combines involved in this advanced research will make known to the public the vast amount of scientific knowledge they have acquired. Possibly this will only happen if and when a world government has been set up to control the scientific wonders which are now within our reach. This dude's asking for a world government? Oh, Bruce, don't do it. Enough is known already to make most of our energy and transport systems obsolete, which may explain why the facts are being suppressed. I have been able to check activity in other parts of the world by applying harmonic calculation to certain positions of latitude and longitude. It is not necessary to use the grid structure and such for some types of calculation once the harmonic process is understood. Eventually, when the whole grid has been plotted, the work will be much easier. In my second book, I stated that the first glimmerings of how true space travel might be achieved came to me when I uncovered the clues that led me to the UFO grid, which laces around our globe. I was aware that my calculations were not precisely accurate in the strict mathematical sense, but I could see that the system was based on space-time geometrics, and at least there was the best possible support for this. None less than the theories of Einstein. Somewhere I knew the system contained a clue to the truth of the unified field, which he had postulated permeates all of existence. I didn't know at the time that this clue had already been found by scientists who were well ahead of me. I know now that they must have understood something of the grid system years ago. They knew that Einstein's ideas about the unified field were correct. What's more, for many years they had been carrying out full-scale research into the practical applications of the mathematical concepts contained in that theory. We were told that Einstein died without completing his equations relating to the unified theory. But in more recent times it has been said that he did in fact complete his work, but that the concepts were so advanced that the full truth was not realized, or was not released. The only way to traverse the vast distances of space is to process the means of manipulating or altering the very structure of space itself, altering the space-time geometric matrix, which to us provides the illusion of form and distance. The method of achieving this lies in the alteration of frequencies controlling the matter-antimatter cycles, which govern our awareness or perception of position in the space-time structure. Time itself is a geometric, just as Einstein postulated. If time can be altered, then the whole universe is waiting for us to come and explore its nook and crannies. In the blink of an eye, we could cross colossal distances. For distance is an illusion. The only thing that keeps places apart in space is time. If it were possible to move from one position to another in space in an infinitely small amount of time, or zero time, then both the positions would coexist according to our awareness. By speeding up the geometric of time, we will be able to bring distant places within close proximity. This is the secret of the UFOs. They travel by means of altering the spatial dimensions around them and repositioning in space-time. I decided to concentrate specifically on 3 harmonic values which appeared to have a close relationship with each other. Previously, I had shown this connection and had truthfully pointed out that I did not know why the relationship was there at all. Just give me a moment here. We got about 10 pages left. Oh. Yeah, we got a lot of material to cover soon. Thankfully, some of these chapters are bigger text. This is the smaller text chapter. But there's a lot of formulas here. Okay. Here's what we'll do. I'm gonna split this chapter into 2. Because we're gonna be talking about Einstein. There's a lot of mathematical formulas here. And we have other graphs, too, at the end of the chapter. It's just a lot of information right now. So, I should have gone and cut another chapter into 2 before, but we ended up running 4 hours one time. But, you know, that's what we'll do. We'll split this chapter into 2 for next week. Because it is just heavy with all of the mathematics for this chapter. And it's important to let this information just kind of seep in with the Bruce Cathie research. Because, see, it's not about how fast we get through the material. I need to be able to process everything that I'm talking about here, and it's getting a little thick for me, honestly. So we'll pick up next week. We'll finish this chapter of Bruce Cathie and his thoughts on Einstein. But really, I'm feeling this is the best way to go about it. So, thanks for being here today. I do want to keep these shorter so that they're more digestible for everyone. I will be back here tomorrow with Bermuda Triangle. So, keep your eyes peeled for that at 6 p.m. Central Standard Time tomorrow. But that'll do it for today. So I thank you all again. Please take care of yourselves. And until the next one, class dismissed.